string. All right, well, let me go ahead and, before we take a break, let's go ahead and create something a little familiar too, based on our weeks here in C. Let me propose that we revisit those examples involving some meow. So for instance, when we had our cat meow back in the first week and then second in C, we did something that was a little stupid at first, whereby we created a file, as I'll do here, this time called meow.py. And if I want a cat to meow 3 times, I could run it once like this, little copy paste, and now Python of meow.py, and I'm done. Now, we've visited this example like 2 times at least now in Scratch and in C. It's correct, I'll stipulate, but what's obviously poorly designed? What's the fault here? Yeah. It should just be a loop, right? Like, why type it 3 times? Literally copying and pasting is almost always a bad thing, except in C when you have the function prototypes that you need to borrow. But in this case, this is just inefficient. So what could we do better here in Python? Well, in Python, we could probably change this in a few different ways. We could borrow some of the syntax we proposed in slide form earlier, like give me a variable called I, set it to 0, no semicolon. While I is less than 3, if I want to do this 3 times, I can go ahead and print out meow, and then I can do I plus equals 1. And I think this would do the trick, Python of meow.py, and we're back in business already. Well, if I wanted to change this to a for loop, well, in Python, it would be a little tighter, but this would not be the best approach. So for I in 0, 1, 2, I could just do print meow like this, and that too would get the job done. But to our discussion earlier, this would get stupid pretty quickly if you had to keep enumerating all of these values. Like, what did we introduce instead? The range function, exactly. So that hands me back way more efficiently just the values I want, indeed 1 at a time. So even this, if I run it a third or fourth time, we've got the same result. But now let's transition to where we went with this back in the day. How can we start to modularize this? Like, just like it would be nice, I claimed, if MIT had given us a meow function, wouldn't it be nice if, like, Python had given us a meow function? Maybe less compelling in Python, but how can I build my own function? Well, I did this briefly with the spell checker earlier, but let me go ahead and propose that we could implement now our own version of this in Python as follows. Let me go ahead and start fresh here and use the keyword def. So this did not exist in C. You had the return value, the function name, the arguments. In Python, you literally say def to define a function. You give it a name like meow. And now I'm going to go ahead and in this function just print out meow. And this lets me change it to anything else I want in the future. But for now, it's an abstraction. And in fact, I can move it out of sight, out of mind. Just going to hit enter a bunch of times to pretend like now it exists, but I don't care how it is implemented. And up here now I can do something like this. For I in range of 3, let me go ahead and not print meow anymore. Let me just call meow, and tightening up my code further. But I think, let's see, Python of meow.py, this is, I think, going to be the first time it does not work correctly. OK, so here we have, sadly, our first Python error. And let's see. The syntax is going to be different from C, or Clang's output. Traceback is like the term of art here. This is like a trace back of all of the lines of code that were just executed, or really functions you called. The file name is uninteresting. This is like my code space specifically, but the file name is important here, meow.py. Line 2 is the issue. OK, I didn't get very far before I screwed up. And then there's a name error. And you'll see in Python, there's typically these capitalized keywords that hint at what the issue is. It's something related to names of variables. Meow is not defined. All right, you're programming Python for the first time. You've screwed up. You're following some online tutorial. You're seeing this. Reason through it. Like, why might meow not be defined? What can we infer about Python? How to troubleshoot logically. Maybe. Is it because meow is defined after? You know, as smart as Python seems to be vis-a-vis C, they have some similar design characteristics. So let's try that. So let me scroll all the way back down to where I moved this earlier. Let me get rid of it way down there. I'll copy it to my clipboard. And let me just kind of hack something together. Let me just put it up here. And let's see if this works. So now let me clear my terminal, run Python of meow.py. OK. we're back in business. So that was actually really good intuition, good debugging technique to sort of reason through it. Now, this is kind of contradicting what I claimed back in week 1, which was that, the main part of your program ideally should just be at the top of the file. Like, don't make me look for it. It's not a huge deal with like a 4-line program, but if you've got 40 lines, 400 lines, you don't want like the juicy part of your program to be way down here and all of these functions way up here. So it would be nice maybe if we actually have a main function. And so it actually turns out to be a convention in Python to define a main function. It's not a special function that's automatically called like in C. But humans realized, you know what, that was a pretty useful feature. Let me define a function called main. Let me indent these lines underneath it. Let me practice what I'm preaching, which is put the main code at the top of the file. And wonderfully in Python now, you do not need prototypes. There's none of that hackish copying and pasting of the return type, the name, and the arguments to a function like we needed in C. This is now OK instead, except for one minor detail. Let me go ahead and run python of meow.py. Hopefully now I've solved this problem by having a main function, but now nothing has happened. All right, even if you've never programmed in Python before, what might explain this behavior? And how do I fix? Again, when you're off in the real world learning some new language, all you have is deductive logic to debug. Yeah? Right, so the solution, to be clear, in C was that we had to put the prototype up here. Otherwise, we'd get an error message. In this case, I'm actually not getting an error message. And indeed, I'll claim that you don't need the prototypes in Python. Just not necessary, because that was annoying, if nothing else. But what else might explain? Yeah, and back? Yeah, maybe you have to call main itself. If main is not some special status in Python, maybe just because it exists isn't enough. And indeed, if you want to call main, the new convention is actually going to be, as the very last line of your program typically, to literally call main. It's a little stupid looking, but they made a design decision, and this is how now we work around it. Python of meow.py now. We're back in business. But now logically, why does this work the way it does? Well, in this case, top to bottom, line 1 is telling Python to define a function called main, and then define it as follows, lines 2 and 3. But it's not calling main yet. Line 6 is telling Python how to define a function called meow, but it's not calling these lines yet. Now, on line 10, you're telling Python call main. And at that point, Python has been trained, if you will, to know what main is on line 1, to know what meow is on line 6. And so it's now perfectly OK for main to be above meow, because you never called them yet. You defined, and then you called. And that's the logic behind this. Any questions now on the structure of this technique here? Now, let's do one more then. Recall that the last thing we did in Scratch and in Python, Scratch and in C, was to actually parameterize these same functions. So suppose that you don't want main to be responsible for the loop here. You instead want to very simply do something like meow 3 times and be done with it. Well, in Python, it's going to be similar in spirit to C. But again, we don't need to keep mentioning data types. If you want meow to take some argument, like a number, n, you can just specify n as the name of that argument. Or you could call it anything else, of course, that you want. You don't have to specify int or anything else. In your code now, inside of meow, you can do something like for I in, let's say, I definitely now can't do this, because like that would be weird to start the list and end it with n. So if I can come back over here, what's the solution? How can I do something n times? Yeah, using range. So range is nice because I can pass in now this variable n, and now I can now I can print out, quote unquote, meow. So it's almost the same as in Scratch, almost the same as in C, but it's a little simpler. And if now I run meow.py, I'll have the ability now to do this here as well. All right, questions on any of this? Right now, we're sort of like taking this stroll through week 1. We're going to momentarily escalate things to look not only at some of these basics, but also other features like we saw with face recognition, with the speller or the like. Because of how many of us are here, we have a huge amount of candy out in the lobby. So why don't we go ahead and take a 10-minute break, and when we come back, we'll do even fancier, more powerful things with Python in 10.